This tutorial is for those of you who are entering or want to enter PhD programs where you need language training. So maybe in humanities or social sciences, you need to be able to conduct research in a language that is not your first language. There is a lot of confusion that surrounds this dimension of especially the application process, and I want to give you some advice. It's one person's advice, but this one is pretty solid, and I think if you were to ask around, you'd find something similar. The basic rule of thumb is if you are conducting research in a language that is not your mother tongue, then you need to be able to walk in the front door of your PhD program ready to begin conducting research in that language, whether it's archival research, whether it's ethnographic, interview. You need to be research ready in whatever that language is. So in my world, for me, when I started my graduate program, that was Chinese, but it could be anything. So something that I often hear or I receive inquiries about for prospective PhD students is people who say, I'm interested in this and you work on this and I'm wondering whether or not this would make sense. And then as I begin to kind of delve a little bit deeper into the person's background, into their CV, I find that they might have 2 years or 3 years or 4 years of coursework in Chinese. And the very first thing that I have to say, I sort of have to stop the tape and say, there really is no point in kind of exploring this avenue any further at this moment, because no graduate program that I'm aware of is going to touch your candidacy until you can shore up your primary research language capabilities. And the reason is very simple. The graduate program, a PhD program, a North American one just to focus, but even more so for those in UK and Western Europe, is really short. I mean, we joke about how it takes a long time, but within a North American PhD program, there are 2 to 3 years of coursework, only basically 1 year of dedicated dissertation field work, and then the dissertation phase and the job search phase and so forth. And in those 2 to 3 years of coursework, there simply isn't time to allow a candidate to basically achieve proficiency in their primary research language and then have a fighting chance of figuring out what their dissertation is. They need to have that language in their pocket, ready to go, because as soon as they arrive, there are going to be research seminar papers due in the first year, and so forth and so on. So your primary language should really be at high performing level, peak performance when you enter. Now, does that mean if anyone sees you using a dictionary, they're going to throw you out of the program? No. I mean, reference works, dictionaries, that's all part of the work. What I mean is, and I think you can know this instinctually, there is a big difference between a kind of mid or even advanced language learner of a language and those who are able to live and work in it with confidence, with confidence. So that's just the first language. If you need a second research language, by which I mean something beyond your mother tongue, or third, then the coursework phase of a PhD program certainly is a place that you can pick up a second language. In fact, it might even be required. When I did my work at Columbia University, there's this long sort of legacy requirement for people working on modern China to learn modern Japanese, because back in the day, the leading scholarship on large phases of Chinese history was done by Japanese scholars. And for certain time periods, that's still true, but it's kind of a legacy system. But I did 3 years of Japanese as part of my coursework when I was a grad student. And I also studied 2 years of Russian and so forth and so on. So a second language is certainly something that you can work on in the program. The big question is, will that language actually be ready and operational by the time you are going to begin serious dissertation work? Now, there's sort of an if-then question. If the answer is yes, if you can get to a sort of advanced proficiency in a second research language by the time of your dissertation, well then you want to be planning for that. you want to be planning in your conceptualization of your dissertation and say, okay, I'm a first year now, but if I do the math, I'm going to arrive at, let's say, fourth year of whatever language before I get on a plane to go do archival work or ethnographic work. So I should really start to think about where and how that particular language could play a role in basically the bibliography of my dissertation. You need to start thinking about that now so that you can apply to the relevant grants, you can read the relevant literature, etc. And versus a scenario in which you say, okay, I'm going to start a new research language in grad school in my PhD coursework phase, but there is not a snowball's chance in hell that I'm going to achieve proficiency by the time I get on that plane. Does that mean it's all for nothing? No, because you have a career ahead of you. And while you may not end up being able to use that language for your dissertation, there is nothing to say that you might not use it in the revision of your dissertation into the book. You might add a complete chapter. You might add sections of chapters. You might, you see what I'm getting at. Because if you think about a 5, 6, 7-year PhD, then you could imagine doing 5 years worth or more of coursework in a particular language. And by the time you have had the PhD conferred upon you, be really advanced in that language, such that when you are on the market, when you are revising your dissertation into a book, you could, when you're doing a postdoc, when you're going to get a grant to do more research, now you're ready to do primary research in that language. So you also want to think in a career level. And certainly for second projects, second books, I didn't use my Japanese language abilities really until my second book. I read some things in original Japanese language for my dissertation, but they just weren't relevant and they didn't show up. But for my second book, many years later, they did. So think in terms of careers. A third and final point in this tutorial is if you're serious about language, you need to really make use of summers. So I have another tutorial where I mention this about the summer before your grad program begins, where I mention this, but there's also the summer between your first and second year, between your second and third year. And one thing you can do with those summers, if you get the right grants, if you get the right fellowship or support, or maybe your grad program would support this anyway, is to do intensive early year language training in your home country. Or you could study abroad if you get a larger grant. But you can do intensive full first year language training in a summer, or you can do intensive second year language training compressed into a summer. And what that means is that by the end of your first year of your PhD program, you could be finished with 2 years of a language, such that when you enter your second year, the second year of your PhD program coursework, you are beginning at third year of whatever language we're talking about. Now, there are limits to that. Most intensive summer programs do not do like intensive fourth year, blah, blah, blah in a summer, or intensive fifth year in a summer. Typically then, those types of programs really focus on first and second years of languages. But if you're serious about getting a language up and running, that's one that you want to talk about. And the last bonus tip would be this. Let's say that you discover that your primary language is not as good as you thought it was. Maybe you were hot shit in your undergrad and you were overconfident about your ability, and then you step into the PhD program, you see archival documents for the first time, and you go like, I can't read any of this. Like, my God, it's all over. Or you start to realize the limits as you do interviews or ethnographic work, whatever it is. You need to talk to someone about that. You're not going to be thrown out of your program. I don't know who your program is, but I'm gonna bet $1 that you're not going to be thrown out of it. But you don't want to keep that a secret. I have seen it happen. I have met students who had that issue, and they, in consultation with their advisors, their program, did something about it. And in particular, what many of them ended up doing was applying for grants like the Blakemore, or there's certain Fulbright, ACLS. It depends upon your country of origin and where you're doing your work. But they basically, in consultation with their advisor, did a year of intensive training in their primary language as a way to just get it right now. Because here's the thing, if you try to keep that dark secret to yourself, no one's going to pay for it except you. You might be able to trick people in thinking that you're better at your primary language than you are, but it's going to show up in your primary research. It's going to show up in your choice of sources for your dissertation. And it's going to get worse over time because most people, I think, would agree that they are never quite as amazing at their research language if it's, let's call it a language, an acquired language, a foreign language to you, not a mother tongue, something that you have spent time learning. You are never quite as amazing at that language as you are in grad school and maybe the early years of postdoc assistant professor. And at that point, it's very, very common for language skills to sort of gently erode because of lack of opportunities, lack of time spent in whatever country we're talking about, and so forth and so on. So if you do feel like you have a problem with your primary language, like see your doctor, so to speak. Do not try to keep that to yourself because it will have career level negative consequences, and it's better to address it now. And it can be done. And I can say for the people, I won't name them by name, but they solved the problem, they shored up their primary language, and now they are, in many cases, assistant professors with amazing careers and beyond. So don't despair. I'll see you in the next tutorial.